Yes, hello again and welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, where we continue to check out more of those old school vintage and classic motocrossers from way back in the day. Now, a quick hello here to all the brand new subscribers who have just recently signed up to my channel since my last video posting, so welcome aboard, and I do hope that you continue to enjoy future videos here on my channel with regards looking at these old classic race bikes. Now, we're just about a week away now from the start of a brand new Scottish Classic racing season, and of course during 2022 we will be bringing you all of the bikes from the Scottish paddocks and of course the trackside racing action. So if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, then now would be quite a good time to do that in order that you don't miss out on any future videos that I post. Okay, now it's been quite some time since we've featured any Swedish Husqvarna bikes here on Classic Dirt Bike TV, so we're going to put that right immediately by taking a look at this fully restored 1978 390CR Twinshocker. Okay, so as I said, it's been quite some time since we've featured any Swedish Husqvarna bikes here on CDB TV, so we're going to put that right immediately here by taking a look at this 1978 390CR Husqvarna, which is another bike that's part of the Terry Pickering Classic Dirt Bike collection. Now, our featured 78 390 here was actually never really a bike at all originally, because this machine was built using many of the boxes of spare Husky parts that Terry has in his Aladdin's cave of motorcycle spare parts. Now, normally Terry tends to tackle these kind of classic dirt bike restorations on his own, although at the time that Terry decided to start this project he was very busy with work commitments, and so he then handed over all of the boxes of parts to his friend and classic dirt bike builder Keith Ree, so that Keith could complete the build on Terry's behalf. Now, the bike's builder Keith Ree, who is seen here on the left, has already restored countless classic dirt bikes in the past, and Keith's pictured here at the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show alongside the legendary Roger Harvey, as Keith presents him with his now fully restored old 440 Micro that Roger raced back in the day. So Keith then took up all of Terry's Husky bits and pieces and he began to construct this superb looking machine. Although Keith's certainly no stranger to old dirt bikes or dirt bike racing, as Keith was once a very successful works rider for the German Kramer factory back in the early 1980s, and he not only knows how to build a bike, but he certainly knows how to ride them as well. But it's suffice to say that every part of this 390 has undergone a full refurbishment, and virtually every single component is more or less in the same condition as it would have been back in 1978. And so as we begin with the bike's chassis, now this chrome moly steel frame was inspected for any signs of damage, and any other repairs that were needed were all corrected before it was then painted. But although these 390 frames were made of steel, they were still reasonably light compared to other equivalent motocrossers of their day. Now, once again, it was a steel swing arm that was fitted on the rear of our 390, which once more was very strong, and it had just about the right amount of flex to feed back to the rider when it was bouncing over the rough stuff on the racetrack. Now, this swing arm here was also made stronger on this 78 390, which was an upgrade over the previous 1977 Husky model. And so as we come along to the bike's motor now, this again, as you'd expect, was given a full going over with a full strip down and rebuild, and with every internal component inspected for signs of wear and tear. Although basically what we ended up here with is a brand new 390CR engine after all of its critical components were sorted out. And as you're aware, these Husky motors did have magnesium engine casings to once again help keep the overall weight of the bike down, and basically it was a 390cc single cylinder reed valve motor that had a great reputation for its reliability and power, and it was certainly one of the best engines that you could get in a motocross bike for 1978. Now inside this cylinder you didn't have a replaceable liner like some of the other bikes of its time, but of course you could still rebore this engine, and as I recall, I think you could do up to about 4 oversizes before the cylinder was done. Now the fuel for that 390 motor was fed through this quite modern reed valve block, and these reed valves certainly helped to stop the motor bogging down in the slow corners, which as you know was sometimes a problem on some of the older piston port engines, where you would just crack the throttle open and it would then take a second or two before the engine would pick up. But it was a good addition to this fantastic Husky motor. But back in 1978, these 390s would have been fitted with a 38mm Mikuni carb as a stock item, and it certainly looks like our Husky here has that very same carburetor fitted, and this in turn was bolted onto the bike's air filter box, which, as you can see, was quite easily accessible for cleaning and maintenance by simply removing these 4 Allen bolts on the outer rim of the casing. And so as we move on to the transmission side of the motor, we have a standard wet multi-plate clutch with a magnesium outer casing, and these clutches were actually gear driven from the crankshaft, and not unlike some of the other motocross bikes of their time, like the old Micos that used primary chains to connect the crank and the clutch together. Now the gearbox once again was a 6-speed unit, so there were plenty cogs inside this motor to keep you shifting and make the best use of the 37 or so horsepower that these 390s punched out. Now the sparks for the motor's ignition were all supplied by a modern style Motoplat CDI electronic system, which were very popular on other makes and models of motocrossers of their time, and this system was reasonably efficient and quite reliable as well. Now the 390 Husky's Kickstarter back in 1978 was always a bit of a bugbear with many riders, as it seemed that no matter where you placed the Kickstarter when you unfolded it, you never seemed to get that lever in exactly the right place to get a good kick at the engine to fire the bike into life. But then again, maybe that's just me, because I did have a similar Husky to this myself back in the day, and being 6'4", I still found it quite awkward to kick into life. But just to conclude the parts of the motor side of this bike build, this exhaust expansion chamber again is said to be the stock 1978 item for our Husky, and this pipe here was basically an original undamaged pipe that Terry had in his spare parts bins, and all that was really required was just to give it a quick inspection to see if any welding was needed, and then it was then painted in this heat resistant black paint. And at the business end of the exhaust, of course, we have the original tailpipe, which could be opened up so that you could remove and then repack it with fresh silencer packing. And so as we move on to the bike's front suspension, now up front on the 78 390 we had a set of leading axle Husqvarna forks, which again for that year were a pretty good set of suspension units, and as you'd expect for 1978 they didn't have much in the way of adjustments to the rebound and damping, but experimenting with different weights of fork oil and then maybe adding or removing air through these Schrader valves on the top of each leg could certainly help matters a little, but they did give the rider about 10 inches of travel to work with, so as you can see she had quite long legs for a 1978 lady. Again, both the front and rear brakes were excellent on these Huskies, even although they were still old school drum brakes, but they were certainly smooth in their action. They were strong and very predictable when you operated the brake levers. And during the bike's refurbishment, these hubs received a brand new set of spokes that were then laced onto the Husqvarna Nordisk gold coloured alloy wheels. Now, one of the other intriguing facts about these 390s from 1978 were that although this front wheel was your average 21-inch motocross wheel, the rear wheel was actually a 17-inch rim, and not as you'd expect the normal standard 18-inch unit based on other machines. But the other factor about these 17-inch wheels were that Husqvarna never actually supplied them with a rim lock for the tyre originally, so that you could reduce the air pressure in the tyre for more grip, without of course the fear of it slipping on the rim. But of course, to remedy that particular little problem, you could then purchase a rim lock from a supplier and then fit it to the wheel yourself. And so as we move on to the bike's rear suspension system, which in our case here are actually a pair of old school Girling dampers, which is quite a rare sight on a Husqvarna from that particular year, as I always thought that these Huskies did have Öhlins piggybacks fitted as standard back then. But as I say, I don't intend to know everything about every single motorcycle, so there's certainly no need to jump on my head if that's not the case. But certainly one of the nicer points on this Keith Ree built Husqvarna is the superb fuel tank, and more especially this black and gold combination in the tank's graphics. And over the years, Husqvarna have certainly produced some very nice designs on these alloy fuel cells in a range of different colours as well, with this trademark chrome type side panel. But normally the tank here would have held around 2 gallons of pre-mixed fuel, which was usually more than enough to feed that thirsty 390 motor. But once again, this was another old Husqvarna tank that Keith did a full restoration on before fitting it back on to the chassis. Now, also for 1978, you possibly couldn't really ask for a comfier seat on a twin-shock motocross bike, because these Husqvarna seats again were among the best in the business, and this deep plush unit that was fitted to the 390CRs certainly slotted in perfectly with the light and agile Husqvarna chassis. And so as we get to the business end of our 390 Husky, we have proper period correct Husqvarna handlebars with all of their associated Magura levers and their covers, and naturally again a Swedish Gunnar Gasser throttle twist grip is also fitted to tame the 37 horsepower or so that the 392-stroke motor is said to produce. Now, the handlebars again were rubber mounted where they bolted through that top triple clamp, and this was done just to try and help reduce the vibration and dampen down any bad vibes that were coming from that Husky engine. Now, once again, as far as I'm aware, the bike's front and rear plastics are period correct replacement Husqvarna parts, and there are companies now who are producing and selling these replacement plastics for these older 1970s Twinshockers, and they're more or less all identical to the original stock items from back in the day. Although it goes without saying that each and every single part on this bike has undergone a full refurbishment before it was then fitted back onto the chassis, and when you consider that this machine was never really a bike at all originally, but just boxes of rusty old Husqvarna parts, then you have to admit that Keith's done a fantastic job of rescuing a collection of old bike parts from what might have been an uncertain future. Although you can rest assured that this particular 390CR will sit nicely alongside some of the other historic motocross classics that Terry has in his compendium of rare off-road motorcycles. And if you're a regular visitor to my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel, then you may have already seen many of the bikes seen here in this picture. Although, summing up, I have to say that back in the day, these 390CRs were certainly excellent bikes, as of course were many of the other Husqvarna bikes of that golden era of scrambling in the 1970s, because these Twinshockers were certainly light and they were easy to throw about and had very good suspension on the front and at the rear, although the jewel in this particular crown was that 392-stroke motor, which was just a peach of a power plant, and that's exactly why these 1978 390s were so popular all around the globe. So there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that walk around that fully restored machine, another one of the bikes from the Terry Pickering Classic Dirt Bike collection, and a bike of course that was built by Keith Ree, and when you consider that wasn't really a machine at all at one time and was just made up of boxes of spare Husqvarna parts that Terry had in his workshop, it's certainly turned out another nice looking machine. Okay, coming up in my next video posting, we're going to continue the Husqvarna theme here on my channel, and we're going to take a look at this lovely trio of 4-stroke Husqvarnas that I came across at the 2022 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. Now, these bikes were built by the HVA factory boys, and these bikes were raced by the American Twinshock racing team at the Vets MXDN event at Farleigh Castle in 2021. So we'll take a much more detailed look at these three lovely bikes when we return to Classic Dirt Bike TV. But until then, of course, everybody out there, continue to enjoy your old vintage racers and try and be safe while you're doing it. And I hope you'll all return here again soon to talk about more vintage iron right here on your #1 and favourite Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.